This is Sullla once again. Welcome to part 3 of this look at some of my vacation travels from 2013. What we're going to be looking at today is the next part of this trip, the part where up to this point I had spent a lot of time in the cities. In the first part, most of the pictures were from Toronto and Ottawa. The second part were mostly from Montreal and Quebec City. In this next part, we're going to be heading out of the urban parts of Canada and heading out to some of the wilds of the Great White North, if you want to put it that way. So let's go ahead and open this up. These pictures are going to be from Newfoundland and Labrador, and I'll go ahead and show where that is. I think is sort of an important thing to do first. So let's consult our old friend, not Gmail, not Gmail, but Google Maps. Go ahead and click here. So let's go ahead, take a look at where this is. Alrighty, so as I said before on this trip, I'd gone through Niagara, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Quebec, and then up to Saguenay at the end of that last part. Well, today, what we're going to be looking at is Newfoundland and Labrador, which are up here. This is Labrador here, this area on the actual mainland, not on an island. So where I had been before was I had been in Quebec. I drove up to Saguenay and Tadoussac, which is right here. See, it appears if I zoom in. Then from there, I stayed in Rivière-du-Loup, so I had to drive all the way down here to Quebec and then all the way back up to Rivière-du-Loup. What you don't see, because there's no pictures, is there's no pictures from day 7. That day was spent driving, just all day driving from Rivière-du-Loup all the way across the Trans-Canadian Highway, through New Brunswick, through Nova Scotia, and up to right here, North Sydney, which is where the ferry leaves to go over to Newfoundland. So that's no pictures from that. I actually do have other pictures. I actually did a trip a number of years ago that went through New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island. I may show some of those pictures another time if people are interested, but no pictures from that on this particular trip. So anyway, you have to go to North Sydney to catch the ferry if you're planning on driving to Newfoundland. If you're not planning on flying there, have to leave from this ferry in North Sydney. So what we're going to do is pick up the journey from there and go ahead and look at these pictures, shall we? So let's go ahead, cue this up. Here are the cars getting ready to travel across. The ferry goes from, as I said, North Sydney in Nova Scotia on Cape Breton Island over to Port aux Basques, which is on Newfoundland. This particular ferry, it left at 5:30 a.m. And in order to be on that ferry, you had to have your car in line 2 hours ahead of time. Yes, so your car had to be there by 3:30 a.m. I actually had to get up at 3 this day, and I was staying in a hotel that was very close to the ferry in North Sydney, but I had to have my car out here by 3. So this picture's from about 3:15 in the morning. It was very early, is all I'm going to say, very early. This is the ferry ship. You can't see it too well. It's quite blurry. If you're ever wondering what it looks like inside in terms of where the cars go, well, you drive your car in and they put you in a row right behind the other cars. These, I don't know what you call them, people who work on the ships are directing where you go, and basically this is what it looks like on the inside of one of these huge ferry ships. And of course you don't spend your time down there. You can't stay in your car while you're on the ferry. You go up to the passenger floors, and this is what this happened to look like on this particular one. There was a little place where they served drinks, so nobody was drinking much at 6 in the morning. Place with TVs, and a lot of people were just zonked out and went to sleep. And I can't blame them. I slept for a couple hours too on this trip. Here is the diagram of this particular ship. Again, the bottom levels are where they store the cars for the most part, the bottom levels, and then the actual passenger decks here were 6, 7, and 7, 8, and 9, excuse me. The main one was deck 7. Deck 8 was sleeping cabins. All these are, you could pay extra to get a sleeping cabin, but I'm cheap, so I didn't do that. And then deck 9 was like up on top of the ship. So anyway, you get the picture. Now, this is actually up on top of the ship. They did store some of the big 18-wheelers, some of the big trucks right on the deck of the ship. I wonder if they would have done that if the weather had been rough. I'm not sure, but in any case, the weather was very good for this particular passage, and they were storing them up there. So this is up on top of the ship right as it's about ready to set on off. Here's a look back at North Sydney. Very small, very quiet, pretty much just there to service the ferry shuttle service that goes over to Newfoundland. And this was a picture of the sun coming up right at about 6 a.m. as we were getting ready to leave. And this was I'd say a truly magical sunrise. You don't get to see the sun come up that often unless you have to get up super early for work or something. But we were fortunate enough on this particular day that right as the ship was leaving, the sun was coming up, and it was sort of cloudy, but you could kind of see the sun peeking through and coming up over the water, and there was a reflection of that reddish sunlight getting reflected off the water. It was very pretty. Of course, you also have the wind in your face as you're leaving port for the first time and starting to head out into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. There was a little lighthouse off in the distance that we were passing by right in the morning sunlight. The light was circling around, the active lighthouse. The light was sort of going around, and you'd see it blink every couple of seconds. But just a gorgeous morning, really, really neat experience. And when you're traveling, sometimes you wonder, is it worth all the effort? Is it worth the money you're spending? This was one of those things where it felt like it was worth it. There were only a couple other people up on the top deck of the ship as it was pulling out. Most people were down in the passenger area. A lot of people were asleep, but there were a couple other people with me up there, and everyone was like, this is just incredible, an amazing experience. And there you go. Can actually see that it's pretty deserted up here on the deck, but just gorgeous views of the sun coming up. This picture is from a little bit later. This is a couple of hours later. This is in the, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10 in the morning. This is when we were maybe halfway across the Gulf of St. Lawrence, heading over to Newfoundland, and the sky was blue, the water was blue. It had sort of cleared up, and this picture just came out perfectly to show what that looked like. This is actually looking backwards. This is looking at the stern of the ship. You can see the wake of the ship in the background there, but it was a great view. And I don't know, I just tried to spend as much time outside. Granted, there's not a lot to see when you're sort of in the open ocean like this. It's just all waves in every direction, but I don't know, I like being at sea, and it wasn't stormy or anything like that. Fortunately, had very clear weather. This is about as not as gentle of a sea as you'll probably like to experience. Here we are on the other side. So this is coming up on Port aux Basques in Newfoundland. This is one of the major ways that people get there. Well, if you take the ferry, this is the main way to get there. So here is the ferry route drawn happily in on Google Maps, and here you go. Port aux Basques is where the ferry unloads on the other side. Newfoundland is, of course, an island. So when it comes in, you go around this little headland here, and then the ferry drops off on the mainland at this little spot here. So you can see that right here in these pictures. Again, gorgeous weather. The water was such a deep blue color. And this little town, Port aux Basques, just seemed to cling to the shoreline. And I got some really great pictures of this particular area. Right as the dock, you can see the terrain here. And note that there were no trees right by the water line. I think that the weather is too rough. They obviously get some terrible storms here. But look at this lighthouse and this little island here right on the edge of the coast. It's so rocky, and there's, I guess, some type of grass that's growing on it. Just came out looking great. So here's the coming up to the town. By the way, Newfoundland is very rocky. It's actually known as the Rock. Some people might know that. If you're from Canada, you may have heard that before, but people colloquially refer to it just as the Rock, and you can certainly see why with all of this. Well, I mean, there's boulders and rocks everywhere. See that quite a bit. But this town was very picturesque. I mean, it looks like it came right off a postcard of a small seaside town. So I took quite a few pictures. And here's the boat coming in. The ferry boat was actually backing in to this particular dock. Again, this is the stern of the ship that's coming up here, and then going to unload everything. Here, anyway, in any case, we are now in Newfoundland at this point. This is the Newfoundland flag over here on the left, in addition to the Canadian flag, and I guess the British flag there as well. I wonder why they have the British flag there. Probably because Newfoundland wasn't part of Canada until the 1950s. But anyway, coming in, and here is one of my patented taking a picture while driving a car. Yes, it probably should not, don't try this at home, would be my recommendation, but have done this before. If you're the only person, as I was on this trip, wasn't traveling with anyone, sometimes you just get a great view and you want to take a picture. So this is what it's like driving on the Trans-Canadian Highway in Newfoundland. Again, the sky this day was picture perfect. Couldn't be much better than this. Here I am coming up on Gros Morne National Park. This is one of the main reasons why I went to Newfoundland. I wanted to go to Gros Morne, which is very, very highly rated as a national park. in Canada. I'll go ahead and show where that is. So this is a pretty good drive to get there. One thing about Newfoundland is nothing is very close to anything else. Newfoundland is quite big, by the way. But anyway, come in here, Port aux Basques, drive up through Corner Brook and Deer Lake, and then here's Gros Morne up here. So yeah, I'd say it was something close to 3 hours to get up to Gros Morne, even after taking the ferry boat. But Gros Morne itself is quite big, and there's a lot of places to hike, places to fish, places to go on some of the lakes, and that's where a lot of these pictures are from that I'm about to show you. Let's go ahead and take a look here at some of them. Look in Gros Morne, again, scenery is fantastic. Can't say much more. Similar in a way to some of the vegetation in the Canadian Rockies that I was visiting last year. The trees, not that tall. Apparently the climate's too tough for the trees to grow very tall, but in this place at least there are trees, all evergreens for the most part. A view of one of the lakes here at Gros Morne. I believe this isn't the actual ocean. I think this is one of the lakes, but there was this very strange fog formation. See this here? This was in the afternoon. This was not in the morning, but this strange fog that clung to the coast in this one area, and you'll see it in a number of these other pictures too. This is from Norris Point, population 850, one of these very small towns that are right next to Gros Morne. So here's the view looking down at Norris Point, another one of these very picturesque small towns that for most of the year is virtually deserted. There's only 800 whatever people living here. But this is the peak of the tourist season, so there are more people in a place like this now. Anyway, this is a picture of right down, I believe this is on a lake. Maybe this is a coast. I'll have to look back at the map. But right down on the water at Norris Point. And again, the water just so very, very blue in all of these pictures. And this is a small dock where people are taking little boats out onto the water. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous view. And remember when I said about that cloud or fog bank? Well, here it is. Here's another picture of it. Down a little bit closer up. I don't know what kind of weather phenomenon causes this to happen, but it was very strange, very, very strange seeing this fog bank. And it didn't burn away in 10 or 15 minutes. I mean, that stayed there for hours, and it was there for the rest of the day. So I don't know what was going on in terms of weather. Maybe someone who's a meteorologist could explain this, but I certainly can't. Anyway, though, but just this one patch had this fog that just did not go away, and it made for some pretty amazing views like this picture here, which I really like. Here's a little boat shed, I guess. They have caribou antlers or moose antlers on the wall. I'm not sure which these are supposed to be, but that's why I took that. And just another view of the lake. People pulling a boat up there. Anyway, Norris Point was quite pretty. Here's the Gros Morne Visitor Center. I didn't spend much time there, but went because I was there. And here's a little map of Gros Morne National Park. This is not a photo, but this is a map that they distributed that I went ahead and put in with the rest of the pictures. So here's Norris Point down here, and I guess that is the actual ocean that comes in and is in sort of a little cove here. The main place, sort of the biggest little town in this area, would be Rocky Harbor. That's where I ended up staying. That's where most of the shops, such as they are located in Rocky Harbor. So these next couple pictures are going to be from Rocky Harbor. The main place where I went hiking was Gros Morne Mountain. I would do that a little bit later. That's this big hiking trail here. And then the other place where a lot of these pictures are from is Western Brook Pond. And that is this location right here. Called a pond. It's much bigger than any pond I've ever seen, but referred to as Western Brook Pond. There's also a lighthouse on Lobster Cove Head. Is that up here? Yes, there it is, Lobster Cove Head, right next to Rocky Harbor. So these next couple of pictures are from the lighthouse. This lighthouse was basically within that fog bank that you saw a couple minutes ago. So all these pictures are sort of within that cloud cover, which meant you couldn't see anything very far away. But that's what it looked like on the inside. And here's Rocky Harbor. Again, Rocky Harbor is not too big, but it seemed to be sort of the center of the tourist destination for Gros Morne. It seemed as though most people stayed in Rocky Harbor if you were going to go to Gros Morne. Again, still within that fog cloud, so you couldn't see very far on this day. This was an overlook up above Rocky Harbor, and you can't see the town at all. It's just a cloud bank. Although you'll see what it looks like the next day in a minute. I took another picture from there. And this is what the shoreline looked like at low tide with the beach exposed. Not very pleasant looking. Looked a little bit better at high tide. This is the place where I stayed. Note that it says rooms and hostel. This is it's called the Gros Morne Hostel. This was one of the best places I stayed on my entire trip. I actually ended up staying here on 2 separate nights. The funny thing is, they did not allow you to make reservations ahead of time. You could not call and make reservations. I had actually phoned them a couple weeks earlier and I said, can I book a room? And they said, well, we actually don't allow people to call ahead and make reservations. So I was like, oh, does that mean I have to get there in the morning or is it going to fill up? And they said, well, we were only full for 2 days, all of last year. And that was when we had a party of like 20 people all show up at once. I was like, oh, okay. So sounds like you're not too crowded. And they said, no, we're not. That was indeed the case when I went there because their hostel, it looks like it can accommodate about 20 people. But there was only one person staying there the night that I was there. Both nights I was there, one other person. A different person each time, but only one other person. And indeed, that's their car right there next to the rental car. Here's my rental car on the left. So I had my own room. The room had 4 beds in it, 2 bunk beds, but I was the only one there, so didn't have to share with anyone. There was only 1 bathroom, but again, nobody else there, so no fighting over that. It was basically like a private bathroom. There was a little kitchen where you could cook food with a stove, with a microwave. There was a TV in the common area, so I pretty much had the place to myself for all intents and purposes, and it only cost me, I think it was $28 to stay here per night. So I mean that was a ridiculously good rate. So very high recommendations. This place was new. It was very clean. If you're going to be in Gros Morne, stay here. It's a great deal is all I can say. Okay, anyway, so this is the next day, getting up early in the morning. I had to get up in the morning. I wanted to catch the ferry over to Labrador, and that's where the next pictures you'll see in a little bit are from. So this picture is actually taken from the same spot that this one is taken. This is the same spot, this overlook over the town of Rocky Harbor. So this is what it looks like when it's in the middle of a fog bank, and there's what it looks like without that huge fog cover. It's a lot nicer, right? A little bit prettier when you can actually see in the morning sunlight. So yes, another picturesque town. And if you notice where that low tide area was earlier, that's where that one is, in the light of the morning sun. This is taken at maybe, I think this is taken at about 7 a.m. the next morning. Very quiet, nobody kind of out on the road yet. And so here's another view looking out across the water from up sort of up high on this little overlook near the town. Here's the lighthouse in the light of day when it's not in the middle of a huge fog bank. You can see what the lighthouse looks like. This is another picture. I tried to duplicate the same spot. With the blue sky, it just becomes a much better picture, much more attractive. And then looking out over the waters again. When you go to places like this, which are unspoiled wilderness, the water is just very clear and well, much more blue than you see otherwise. Very calm too. I was fortunate that I had good weather. I had very little rain on this trip. Only rained 1 day, and only then in the afternoon. And I was able to sightsee all morning without having that. So anyway, one last picture before moving on. Okay. You do run into wildlife, of course, when you're in national parks, and that's what I was fortunate enough to see on this particular trip. So these, as best I can tell, these are caribou. That is, in other words, reindeer. For we refer to them that way, but technically known as caribou. So yes, deer. They've got the antlers on them, and they've got sort of this. I guess this is like their summer coat transitioning into a winter coat or something, but they looked really scruffy or whatever. But they were out browsing in the morning in a little herd, and they ran off when I got too close, but this is the best picture I was able to get of them. So yeah, I was fortunate to see them. They're only active early in the morning and then typically like in the late evening and at night. So you don't see them during the day, but I was fortunate enough to get a great view of them. And this was one of the better pictures of wildlife that I got. You know that you're getting pretty far north when you're seeing caribou is the thing. And this is indeed pretty far up there. So this is another picture I love. This is just a picture of the road driving north from Gros Morne, heading towards the ferry to Labrador. So yeah, it was in the morning and it was empty, and it looks like it just goes on forever into the distance. I just love this picture. And yes, by the way, if you're wondering where I took this, yes, I am standing right in the middle of the road to take this picture. But hey, there were no cars coming in either direction, so no big deal. Again, early morning, pretty deserted. You're kind of out in the wilderness when you're taking a picture like this. Now this is just another river that I saw. I don't know what the name of this one is, but it's somewhere in Gros Morne on the northern end of the park. Really, really pretty. And here it is emptying out onto the beach. You were not allowed to go on this beach. It was restricted. It was some kind of bird mating location, but it was all fenced off and you weren't supposed to go there. Still, that is a great picture right there. Really nice shot. And you just hope that you're going to have that. Basically, you hope that the weather will cooperate and that you'll be able to capture things like this. Okay, now I actually from there went on to Labrador, but the Labrador pictures I have separate. We'll get to them in a minute. So we're going to jump ahead in time a couple days and look here at Gros Morne Mountain itself. So where is Gros Morne Mountain? Well, I showed it on the map of the park before, but Gros Morne Mountain is down here. Let's see if the trail is on this map. No, it doesn't show up on Google Maps. Well, that's not too surprising. Well, it's right around here on this particular map. We'll look back at the, hold on, let me pull up the Gros Morne map. So, where is that? It's the one that doesn't look anything, oh, there it is, the one that doesn't look anything like the others. Okay, right here. So, this is the trail. I'll go ahead and zoom. Wow, that gets blurry really fast. But this is the longest trail in the park. You park your car here, and then you hike up to the mountain. And it is, oh, I have a picture showing how far it is. I'll pull that up, and it's right here. I think it's 16K for the full hike. Yes, there it is, 16 kilometers return. Now, the time was listed as 6 to 8 hours. Okay, so a little story about this. The time was listed as 6 to 8 hours. Now, I had booked a boat tour, which you're going to see the pictures of in a little bit. I booked a boat tour, and I wanted to get the latest boat tour that they offered so that I could hike Gros Morne Mountain in the morning and then do the boat tour in the, in the afternoon. Now, normally the boat tours run until 6. But on this day, the last boat tour was at 3. The last one was at 3 p.m. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll take the 3 p.m. one. I booked it ahead of time. So the last boat tour left at 3. Now, what that meant was, if Gros Morne Mountain was going to take 8 hours to hike, I was like, well, wait a minute, that means I need to get up really early to hike this mountain, because if it's going to take 8 hours, that means I have to allow time to hike this mountain and then also still be there at the boat tour at 3. And that boat tour wasn't cheap. That boat tour was like $60 too. So I wasn't going to skip that. So anyway, long story short, I had to get up really early to make sure I was done by, 3 o'clock in the afternoon to do the boat tour. So the pictures from this hike, I actually started at 5. I got up at 4:30 and I did this hike starting at about 5. So, you got to allow time. So I figure if it takes 8 hours, I'll be done by 1 p.m. and then I'll have enough time to get over and do the boat tour, because that was, on another part of the park. So anyway, they said 6 to 8 hours. I was like, okay, I better allow 8 hours. Well, anyway, just keep that in mind. Here's a zoomed in picture of the actual trail. So you start here, there's the parking lot. You hike this part, and then up to this point, it's relatively not that interesting. And then at this point, right here is where the trail diverges, and that's when you hike up to the top of the mountain, and that's where it gets real interesting. And then there's sort of a long detour back down again. But that's what the trail looks like. And the whole thing is 16K, which means it's basically 10 miles. 10 miles is not that far. All right, so this is the start, hiking across a little river, entering the trail, and then this is a little bit of what it looks like hiking up. I was, of course, the only one on the trail. I did not see even one person on my hike up because it was so early in the morning. Here's another one of the views in the early part of the trail, looking out over just this little stream, little river. Came out pretty well, I'd say. And this is the trail in the distance. You might think this is Gros Morne Mountain, but it is not. Gros Morne Mountain is also actually off to the left. I actually thought that this was Gros Morne Mountain when I was hiking, but it's not. But anyway, there's the trail going up. And here's just another shot looking back. This is actually looking back towards the road. The road is actually back here, and so I'm looking like back towards it. And it gives you a view of where you've gone. The sun is actually still coming up at this point, so get a nice view. By the way, there is snow on the top of some of these hills in the distance. Can't really see that too well, but yes, there is still some snow up there. All right, so one of my favorite signs that I've seen in a long time. Do not underestimate the mountain. Should you proceed, do not proceed if the top is obscured by cloud or weather conditions. Beyond the point, this hike is much more difficult, blah, blah, blah. If you proceed, stay on the trail to avoid dangerous cliffs. Do not approach animals, stay on the trail, etc., etc. So you get the point. I just love the idea of do not underestimate the mountain. And then there's another sign that's even better in a minute. But anyway, that is the trail actually going up the mountain. It's called the gully, and you go up that little crevasse, I guess, between the two parts of the mountain. But anyway, so this is a view. There was this small but quite pretty mountain lake right at sort of the foot when you start climbing up. And we'll see this lake in a minute. And by the way, the sun's coming up because at this point, it's about 6:30 to 7 a.m. at this point. So the sun's just starting to crest over the horizon. Okay, another great sign here. Reduced visibility may cause you to 1. Become disoriented, 2. Become separated from your party, or 3. Fall over a cliff, resulting in injury or death. Do not proceed if you cannot see the top of Gros Morne or if the weather conditions are deteriorating. So yeah, be careful. Now, when I saw that sign, I was like, oh, come on. Seriously? Fall over a cliff? You've got to be kidding me. But no, this sign is very accurate. You could fall over a cliff very easily on this trail. And if it was heavy fog, I could definitely see that happening. So I actually have to say the sign is pretty accurate, as you'll see later on. Okay. Anyway, so here's the hike, right? The hike goes up. You can see the trail curving up here. The hike goes up this little gully between the two sides, as I mentioned a minute ago. And it goes up this rock slide, apparently. I mean, it's basically where rock has slid down the mountain and sort of created a way to get up to the top. So here's the climb going up. There is that mountain lake we saw a minute ago. There's the trail where you initially come in. You come from over there, and then it goes over that little hill, and then you come up here, and then you just start climbing. And it is a very steep climb. Quite steep. That's what it looks like going up. That said, I didn't think it was as tough as I thought it would be. I actually thought it would be really hard, but you know, it actually wasn't. I've done harder hikes than this in the past. But anyway, that's what it looks like going up. It's steep, don't get me wrong, but I have done harder hikes than this before in the past. And by the way, this is the view looking down when you're getting up close to the top. So remember when we were down by that lake? Yeah, this is what it looks like when you're up near the top looking down. It does get quite windy up near the top. Have to keep that in mind as well. I would not want to try to do this in heavy fog. I think that would be a terrible idea. But anyway, great view looking down, seeing just how high you've gone. Because you go up about 2,000 vertical feet while you're doing this climb in a very short time. And up at the top, the rocks kind of disappear. It levels out. Well, they don't completely disappear. There's still a lot of rocks up there, but they become minimized. It levels off, and you're up on top of this alpine environment. Is really the only way I can describe it. You're basically in the tundra up there because it's too high in elevation. It's too tough for any trees to grow up there. So you're basically in alpine grasses, and this is what it looks like up on top of Gros Morne Mountain. Just rocks and sort of this very tough grass and moss and type stuff. I can't imagine that there's too many animals up there. There are some, but not too many up on top because the conditions are tough. And again, another view of what it looks like up on top. So see the little yellow marker? That's how they tell you where the trail is. The trail goes like through here. So it's marked with these little yellow signs to keep you from just wandering all over the place. They do not want you just walking off through all the rocks because it's apparently a very sensitive habitat for what animals actually do live up here. And speaking of animals, here's one. This is a bird that I barely saw. I believe, according to the signs that were up there, this is a type of ptarmigan. I would not know otherwise. I could be wrong, but I believe that's what the sign said. I don't really know that much about birds, sorry. And I just think it's amazing how the colors on this bird, the feathers, they perfectly blend in with these rocks. Like, you would not see this animal at all if it wasn't moving around. The only reason I saw this bird is it was moving around, and motion, of course, draws the eye, but when it's standing still, no way. Blends right into the rocks. Excuse me. So apparently that's the type of animal that lives up there. Here is the actual summit of Gros Morne, 806 meters. That's about 2,500 feet for us poor Americans who don't use metric. And anyway, just they give you a sign at the top, and so here I am up at the top, and well, that's the best picture I could get. It's hard to take a picture of yourself. You have to use the camera timer, so it's maybe not centered as well as it could be, but there I am. So yes, I did climb the mountain. Gotta get a drink. When you talk a lot, it definitely helps to have something to drink. So anyway, there you go. Picture of me up on top of Gros Morne. Okay, more pictures. Now, from this point on, you start a very gradual descent down from the top of Gros Morne, but there are still some great views. In this area, they've built a little boardwalk over the terrain up top. I guess they do that because they don't want people walking over all of the sensitive grass or whatever that plant life is. I guess that's the idea. And then this is the famous shot from the top of Gros Morne. When you're on the mountain, you look down on one of the lakes that's located nearby. This is Western Brook Pond. And by the way, this pond here is actually where I would be taking a boat tour later this same day. Remember how I mentioned I had to get up and down the mountain and then get back to do a boat tour? This is the lake that I would do the boat tour on, Western Brook Pond. So this is looking down 2,500 feet or 800 meters down to the lake from way up here. By the way, there are no guide rails or barriers or anything like that. This right here is the edge of the cliff, and if you fall off, you are going to die. It's pretty much as simple as that. It is a sheer cliff. You'll see it from the other side later in these pictures. It's a sheer cliff, and you fall, and that's it. So I actually could have gotten closer to get a better picture, but this is as close as I was willing to get to take this picture, as close to the edge as I was willing to go. And I would have loved to have had a picture of me standing with this in the background, but it didn't really work out to get that picture. It's also extremely windy up on top of Gros Morne Mountain, and that factored into the decision as well. When it's really windy, you don't want to get too close to the edge, basically. Again, if it were foggy, I could see someone just walking off or falling off the edge really easily up top here. So it's a gorgeous view. I mean, it's a view to die for up here. Ha! Didn't even mean to say do that, but truly amazing view. But this is as close to the edge as I was willing to get, basically. And then this is another view from the same general area, but looking in the opposite direction. This is looking west, this is looking east from that same general area. And again, this is as close to the edge as I'm willing to get. This is actually off the path already, off the trail, but wasn't willing to get any closer. Here's a staircase descending down. It's actually quite steep. I'm not sure how well that comes across in this picture, but looking down. By the way, there's a little lake. This is not a major lake, but there's a small lake way, way up on top of this particular group of hills. I mean, it's got to be a couple hundred meters up above sea level, but like this little lake is just trapped up there. It's pretty amazing. More coming down. This is a totally different lake, just a small one. Not too much to say about this particular one. And this is actually a camping ground here. Little camping area. There was no one camping here that I saw. It was completely empty, but you can, there's picnic tables and there's a place to set up a tent. So if you want to, you can camp out for the night here. No one was doing so, as I said. And just a view tracing this little river as it winds down between these two ridges. Okay, that's all from Gros Morne Mountain. These next couple of pictures are Western Brook Pond. As I mentioned, this is where the boat tour took place. And you actually have to walk a pretty good distance just to get to the boat tour. Note how it says here, the distance is 5.4K round trip. Estimated time 1 to 2 hours. You have to walk about it's almost 3K to get to where the boat tour starts, because it's not on the coast, it's inland. So you have to park your car and then walk inland roughly 2 miles, roughly 3K to get to Western Brook Pond. Oh, by the way, these time estimates are totally bogus, or they're designed for someone who is much slower than I am, because remember I said I budgeted 8 hours to do the Gros Morne mountain hike? It took me 5.5 hours. I was done before 11 a.m. because I started at 5. And then I had like 3 hours to kill where I had nothing to do. I went and just got lunch, but I just had to kill time in like an internet cafe. So I don't know who's doing these hikes or if they're just out of shape or whatever. But that hike did not take 8 hours. That took me 5.5 hours to do that hike, and I was not rushing either. I could have done that in under 5 hours if I had actually pushed. If I had been trying to hike like in serious fashion. So maybe people are just, I don't know. Maybe it's for people who aren't in particularly good shape. I don't know, but their estimates were way off. And I did these hikes much faster. Like this did not take 1 to 2 hours. This took 45 minutes. In order to get to the actual boat dock. Okay. Anyway, so as I said, you have to hike. And here's some maintenance guys on a little John Deere tractor or something. I don't know. It was interesting enough to warrant a picture. There is Western Brook Pond down there. That's where we're going. The place where these mountains kind of open up. That's where the actual lake itself is. There are these little tiny lakes before that. And what I'm trying to show in this picture is it was, again, extremely windy. There are white caps on, I mean, this is just a tiny little pond here, but there are white caps being raised on it. And the waves were actually hitting the shore, and they were throwing water all the way onto these planks here. Very, very interesting stuff. This grassy area is apparently like a peat bog. It's like dead animals and dead plants have been building up here for like thousands of years or something like that. I don't know. There are all kinds of signs about the ecosystem, but whatever. Here's the actual boat dock. This picture's a little blurry, but that's what it looks like. A little diagram of what this area looked like 15K years ago. With this area was completely covered in glaciers of 15,000 years ago, and then all these lakes were carved out as the glaciers retreated. So that's what it looked like back then, and then this is what it looks like today. So this is actually where Gros Morne Mountain is. This is where we're looking down earlier, and here's Western Brook Pond, this sort of very deep ravine in the middle. And then the coast is, of course, over here. But, you know, you park your car here on the coast, then you hike in, and then that little number 8 is where you get on the boat, and it takes you back into Western Brook Pond. And here's another view overlooking Western Brook Pond, what it looks like. It's pretty amazing. It's really unusual the way that this thing formed. It's basically a fjord, but apparently they can't call it a fjord because fjords are supposed to open out to the ocean, and this one doesn't. So that means it's technically not a fjord, but whatever. It's still pretty amazing to look at. Okay, here's the dock. The boat would be coming in a second. There it is, Westbrook. Well, here's the little boat that we were on, out on the lake. You can see the former tour, the next to last tour, still on that particular one, as we're getting on this particular little boat. So here we are on the boat, and you know, well, other tourists, as you might expect, but you do get some great views. So these next couple pictures are all on the boat tour. I highly recommend doing this tour if you're ever in Gros Morne. This is as I said, the Westbrook Pond tour. It is not cheap. It does cost about $60 to do this, but it is a great tour. It's almost 2 hours in length, and the views are gorgeous. But I guess you can be the judge of that since you'll get a chance to see these pictures. Here's the spray being kicked up by the boat. And by the way, the water was strange. The water was almost black. Though apparently it is very deep inside this pond, and because it doesn't open up to the ocean, there's apparently very little plants and animals living in the pond. That it's like hardly anything lives in there, and it's very deep and it's very cold. So the water looked, I mean, it didn't really look blue, it looked black. So I don't know what was going on, but it's some kind of very strange environmental situation right there. Here's the boat, again, progressing towards these sheer cliffs that we've been seeing before, but as we get closer to them, and of course they kind of open up and you go between them on this body of water. Again, very windy, very windy. All the little white caps on the water. But you get these great views of the rock formations, and there are little waterfalls, like there's a little waterfall that plunges down between these two. Great stuff. And this is just another view looking at one of them. Again, you're going, well, between these two rock formations, and views are great. Here's another waterfall emptying out into the pond right there. Oh, this one, the captain. So this is the driver or captain or whatever you want to call it. And once we kind of got out there, he took his hands off the wheel and he was kind of steering with his feet, which I found amusing. I don't think you're supposed to see this, but you could kind of look in, and he was steering with his knees and his feet. So I guess we weren't in that much danger or anything from that particular exploit. But I was relieved to see he did put his hands on the wheel when we got close to anything, thank goodness. Here's one of the other wildlife we spotted. This is hard to see because it was way up on one of these cliff sides, but this is a pair of moose, actually. This is a mother and a little calf. That's why they don't have the horns. But yes, these are two moose up there. Apparently moose are very common in Gros Morne. Actually, moose are very common all throughout Newfoundland. They even have special moose warning lights in particular areas when a moose has been spotted, but I didn't see any other than this. This was the closest that I got to a moose on this trip. Have to show my pictures. I have run into a moose before. I ran into one in Cape Breton Island a number of years ago when I was there, up close, and they are huge when you see them up close. But that's as close as I got on this trip. And anyway, this was getting into sort of the narrow end of the canyon. Another waterfall coming down here. You see a lot of that. And so here's the end of it. This is where Western Brook Pond ends. And in fact, if you want to, if you're a true die-hard hiker, they will drop you off here, and then it's like a 3-day hike through the back country to get back to the main road. But you have to be pretty serious to do that. And I think you have to sign a waiver specifically saying they're not legally responsible for what happens to you if you go way back there and you do that hike, but they will drop you off. And so here is, again, in the back of the pond, looking back towards the entrance. By the way, up here, these cliffs, it was like up top here, looking down, is where I was earlier in the day when I was on Gros Morne Mountain. You're like up top there, looking down. And then here we are getting back into the pond. This is returning back to the dock, and it looks like you're on the open open ocean, but you're actually not. You're still in this enclosed pond, as crazy as that might look. And there we are returning to the boathouse. So anyway, there you go. And this is where I stayed, at a local bed and breakfast in Newfoundland. This was a little bit further up the Trans-Canada Highway. Auntie M's Lucas House Bed and Breakfast. They have their nice Newfoundland flag right out front. And this was the room inside. Very nice, by the way. Not too expensive. The people that own the place were very friendly. Would definitely recommend them if you're passing through Newfoundland and you need a place to stay. This was in Deer Lake, if I remember correctly. This was in Deer Lake. So those are the pictures from the Gros Morne and the surrounding area. By the way, here's a picture of the Western, a short video from the Western Brook Pond boat tour. I'll go ahead and just play this quickly so you can see what this looked like visually. It's got that very strong wind effect in the background because the wind was very heavy. And there were some decent swells on the water here as well. Not huge, but for a little boat, they were going up and down, I'd say 1 to 2 feet. Less than a meter, but, and there's all the spray getting kicked up. But yeah, I mean, you're definitely going up and down. If you're seasick, you wouldn't have liked that. And again, just a view, well, another view of what it looked like to be on this boat tour. Again, would highly recommend this. It was very worthwhile. So anyway, just to give you a sense of what that looked like in motion, in addition to the static pictures. Okay, while we're here, let's look at the pictures from Labrador, and we'll go from there. So where is Labrador again? Let's zoom out. Again, those pictures I showed were all from Gros Morne. So I actually spent 1 day in Gros Morne, and then the second day, I was in Newfoundland. I drove up the highway here, 430. I drove up to, where is it? To St. Barbe, which is right here, St. Barbe. And that's where the ferry goes over to Labrador. Goes over here to Blanc-Sablon, and then here you are in Labrador. Right there. So anyway, I was only on the coast, but I did get to see a pretty good view of the Labrador Coastal Drive. Now, why go to Labrador? Well, I mean, it's kind of out there in the middle of nowhere. And I figured if I was going to be in Newfoundland anyway, I might as well drive and see at least a little bit of Labrador at the same time. Now, what I was hoping to do was, there's actually a road called the Trans-Labrador Highway, where you travel from Baie-Comeau in Quebec, and it takes you up to Labrador City. And then from Labrador City, it takes you to Happy Valley Goose Bay, which is right here, although you can't see it on the map. There it is, Happy Valley Goose Bay. And then it takes you around down to here. I had been hoping to do that big loop, and I would have done that loop, even though it's a very tough drive. I had booked all the arrangements, but the problem was, when I was going to do this trip, there were huge wildfires raging through western Labrador, all around Labrador City. And in fact, they were so bad that they actually shut down the Trans-Labrador Highway. So there was no way to drive through. They had it shut down, and it was uncertain when it was going to open again. So instead of being able to do the huge loop through Labrador, I did the trip that you saw. So instead of going up around this way, I drove down here to then all through New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and then came up to Newfoundland, and then got to Labrador this way. So completely separate way of getting there. But that meant instead of having like 3 days to drive through Labrador, I took the ferry over. But in any case, so these pictures start in St. Barbe, which is just a tiny town right here on the coast of Newfoundland, and then the rest of them are pictures of Labrador. So let's look at them quickly, shall we? And that'll probably have to be it for this video because it's approaching an hour in length already. So here's the ferry terminal. It is a much smaller ferry terminal here. This is a much smaller ferry, the one that services St. Barbe and Blanc-Sablon. This is a much smaller ferry. When I actually got to the terminal, I got here in plenty of time. It wasn't even open when I got there. It didn't open until like an hour after I got there. So whatever. I already booked my ticket ahead online, of course, but had to get my boarding pass. So here it is. Newfoundland and Labrador, Blanc-Sablon to St. Barbe, passenger ferry service. And you do want to book a reservation ahead of time for this because it actually cannot carry all that many vehicles. I believe it's limited to like 50 vehicles. So now, granted, not a lot of people are on this ferry, but you'd better, you might want to reserve ahead of time if you're going to do this. This is the dock waiting for the ferry to arrive. Again, very blue water. And here's the little town of St. Barbe, Newfoundland. Very small, very picturesque, clings to the coast like many of the others we've seen. Again, that water is just incredibly blue. I don't know what other word to describe it. It's a very deep, rich blue color that you don't see elsewhere. Here's the ferry coming over. Again, this ferry is much smaller than the one that goes from Cape Breton over to Newfoundland. Much, much smaller, much less to see. Here it is pulling up to the dock. And here's them unloading the cars. So yes, by the way, if you're curious, when you take your car onto the ferry, yes, you do drive it onto the boat through this little drawbridge here. Yes, that is how you drive onto and off of the ship. So just keep it in a straight line. Don't go off to the side. But it's not as bad as it looks, actually. It's pretty easy. Just stay in a straight line and follow the car in front of you. This is actually on the opposite side. This is after going on the ferry. There wasn't anything to see on this ferry boat. It was very nondescript. This is about to dock on the other side in Blanc-Sablon. Blanc-Sablon is actually in Quebec. Then you're in Quebec for like 1 mile and you cross over into Labrador. But anyway, this is coming up. Again, note the lack of trees, as we saw earlier when approaching Newfoundland. It's just the climate on the coast is very rugged and apparently just gets lashed with storms in the winter. But apparently it's just too tough for much to grow there. Labrador does have plenty of trees, but not immediately on the coast. But anyway, so here is the dock on the other side. That's where the ferry is pulling up. Okay, and yeah, there's the sign. Just again, another sign that I was there. This was in Blanc-Sablon in Quebec. I would have liked to have seen the interior of this tiny little church, but it was not open. It's a shame. Very, very small church. And here's just a picture of what the town looked like. Not much to see. Here's the sign when you're entering Labrador. And as they put on the sign, welcome to the big land. That's sort of the slang term for Labrador, is the big land. That term makes a lot of sense. When you see what it looks like in Labrador, the just vast empty spaces, that term big land actually does make a lot of sense. Now this is a picture overlooking the immediate town on the other side, which is, hold on. I will look back. Google Maps to the rescue again. That is the town right here. This one is, oh, L'Anse-aux-Clairs. Okay. That is Clear Cove in French. L'Anse-aux-Clairs. This is an overlook looking down. This is the first place you come across when you cross the border into Labrador. And this is actually one of the biggest towns in Labrador. Labrador is pretty empty. This is actually where I ended up staying. It has one of the very, very few hotels that you can actually stay in Labrador. So this is overlooking L'Anse-aux-Clairs, right across the border. This is actually, I believe it's a World War I and World War II memorial to people from Labrador who served in the Great War and World War II. So there's a picture looking down. Again, I know it doesn't look like that much, but this is actually one of the biggest towns in Labrador. It's just not a lot of people live here. It's very empty, but that gives you an idea of what it looks like. This is also where the Gateway to Labrador Visitor Center is located, so you can get promotional materials, information about Labrador. One of the, again, note how windy it is. You can see by the flags, everything on the coast is windy. So there's your Newfoundland flag, and Labrador has its own flag. Yeah, so here's the Labrador flag. I do have my own souvenir Labrador flag that I'll go ahead and pull out here. So one thing I did pick up, here's my Labrador flag, a little one that was like $5 or so. It's got the white, the green, and the blue, and those are very appropriate colors. The green, well, because for the trees, the blue for the sky, and then the white. Why the white? Well, because it snows so darn much in the winter. The snow piles up by the meter in Labrador. I've seen some of the photos from the winter, and it's insane. Do not try to travel to this region in winter. Here is a picture of the Labrador Coastal Drive. So the ferry comes in at Blanc-Sablon, as we saw there. L'Anse-aux-Clairs, L'Anse-aux-Morts, L'Anse-aux-Loups. L'Anse means cove in French, so they have a lot of coves here. And the last kind of town that you get to on this drive is Red Bay. That's the last one that I would go to on this particular trip. Now you can keep going from there up to Mary's Harbor, up to Port Hope Simpson, and eventually over to Goose Bay. That said, this is a very, very long drive, and I had to, I didn't even get over to Labrador until about 1 in the afternoon, 1 or 2 in the afternoon. So just driving to Red Bay and then driving back to L'Anse-aux-Clairs, where I was staying for the night, that was plenty for me on this trip. But I mean, you can go much further, and if I had done the full Trans-Labrador Highway, I would have gone further. But just not enough time and not enough money to make that a reality. This picture shows you what driving in Labrador is like. This is a great idea. Gives you a great idea of what it's like to drive in Labrador. Note that there's just nothing. I mean, there's no people. There's pretty much nothing in the way of buildings, although there's another tiny little town over here. And most of the roads are not paved. Nearly all the roads are gravel roads. The coastal road I was on was the only paved road. So you're driving, off country, and your vehicle better be in pretty good shape if you're going to do this, because it is hard driving, and it's hard going on your car. But I really enjoy this picture because it gives you an idea of what it's like to be up here in Labrador. And hopefully you're starting to get an idea of why they call this the Big Land when you start to see pictures like this. Now, this particular detour went through L'Entre-Amours, Love Cove in English, went through this little town, L'Entre-Amours, and the idea was to go to the Port-Amour lighthouse, which is a big lighthouse up here. It's designed to, I guess, safeguard ships that were passing by. One of the biggest lighthouses on the Atlantic coast of Canada, and it's still in operation too, by the way. This is an active working lighthouse. I mean, it's all computerized. There's not a person that lives in here, but it is still a working lighthouse. Here's a view coming up on it. It's quite tall, extends up, I guess, looks like I think it's about 100 feet roughly, so 30, 35 meters, something like that. Pretty good in the way of height. This is the climb up to the top, to give you an idea of what it looks like. You have to climb up quite a few steps to get to the top. And here's the actual light in operation. This light blinks on and off, and then it's reflected by these enormous mirrors to go out and so people can see it. And the view from the top is fantastic. You can tell that this is through glass, get a little bit of that reflection, but you can see a very long way. So again, green, like the Labrador flag, green on the coast, then the blue for the sea and blue for the sky, and then white for the snow that piles up in the winter. There's my rental car again, and there's the one other tourist that was here to check out the lighthouse. That's looking north from the lighthouse, and then this is the opposite direction looking south. Again, I was fortunate that I had great weather. It was a clear day, and you could see just for miles and miles in all directions. So again, great views. That's looking down. I believe that this is was an older lighthouse. I think. I'm not 100% sure, but clearly there's the foundation of something that was there. And even out there, it looks like there was something built at one time. But in any case, exists no more. My guess is that that was the foundation of an older lighthouse that's no longer there. You get a nice view of the coast too. The water is, as I said, comes through really, really well. This was a picture of the light coming through, and then due to the prism effect, it was creating this rainbow color on the wall. I don't know, maybe it's a random picture, but I thought that was pretty interesting. It was very vivid, bright. If you like rainbow colored stuff, well, you'd enjoy that. Here's just a picture of a lookout, Lanzo Diabla. So this is Devil's Cove, in other words, and just another one of these scenic lookouts. So there's the view, looking down. Again, the water. Deep, deep blue, as I mentioned over and over again throughout this video, a very, very deep colored blue. And, there's just not much there. It's just so open and empty. You just feel like you can see forever anytime you get to a high up spot. Here's another view on the drive heading north on the Labrador Coastal Drive. This is a view looking just towards the interior. It was just another scenic overlook. Now, this picture itself is pretty good. I like this picture a lot, but there was an even better view just to the right. So, yeah, that was the view just to the right from that same scenic lookout. Gorgeous, gorgeous scenery. When you get pictures like this, it makes all the travel that you have to do to get to these places, it tends to make it worthwhile, because you do not see things like this in the area where I live. We don't get views like this in the DC metropolitan area, which is where I live, near Washington, DC. So I mean, you don't see natural landscapes like this. So as I said, that picture was pretty good, but this one even better. And again, I will mention one other thing. Note how stunted all the trees are, how they're all only they're not even like the height of a person. Again, that's due to the climate just being very, very rough up here. You're almost in a tundra climate. Not quite, because there are trees, but you're pretty close to that because of how nasty it gets in the winter. All right, these last pictures are from Red Bay. So this is the town of Red Bay, and it even gives you a handy little diagram. You are here, right there. This is where the road comes in. Tracy Hill and Boney Shore walking trails. Right here, there's a walking trail where you go up, and there's like a hill. You can look down on the rest of the town. So that's where these next couple pictures are from. And then everything else you drive around, and the main town is sort of over here. Red Bay is one of the largest towns on the Labrador Coast. So here's where the walking trail begins. As you'll see, that doesn't mean it's very big. Like most else in Labrador, it's pretty small. There's a view looking across the water, the actual Red Bay itself. And now you get to see some interesting stuff about Red Bay, because Red Bay had a number of unique characteristics. For one thing, there were a couple of these little islands in the bay, some of them having these houses that looked old and abandoned. For instance, I think these houses have been abandoned. And the other thing is, yeah, you might notice there's some little ice flows in the water, and you're not missing that when you see that. Icebergs float down from Baffin Island in Greenland, and they head down the coast, and eventually they wind up further south on the Labrador coast. So yes, I mean, you're seeing what's left of icebergs that calved off in the summer, and they've floated down the coast. So yeah, there's a couple of them. And remember, these pictures are taken in July, so we're not here in March or something. We're here in July, in the heart of the summer, and you still see, well, the remnants of icebergs in the harbor, which I thought was just amazing. So that was pretty wild. Here's the walk up the hill to the overlook of Red Bay. And there you see other things. There is this, one of the other things that makes Red Bay unique is there are these islands in the harbor. So I don't know if people live in these houses or what, but it's pretty wild. And by the way, there in the background, the land you can see out there, that's actually Newfoundland. On a clear day, you can easily see across the, I think it's about 20 to 25 miles over to the other side. In other words, 35K, I'd say, about to the other side. So you can see it on a clear day like this very easily if you're up high, so you can look there. This is up on the hill looking down. You get a great view of the Red Bay Harbor. Again, there's these little islands that kind of shelter Red Bay, and that's obviously why people chose to build a town here, because it's sheltered. This was used by fishermen, particularly actually Basque fishermen. Yes, people who were Basque came over and apparently lived in Red Bay back in, as far back as the 16th century, according to the stuff that they had there. So there's the trail going up, and again, here's another view of what it looked like up on top. Views are great. I mean, unfortunately, this one didn't turn out. The camera I use sometimes takes pictures that come out blurry. I don't know why it does that. It's something, the settings don't click or it doesn't focus properly. So I try to avoid that, but occasionally they come in. I actually end up having to delete a lot of photos. And then, it's like, oh, it came out blurry, take it again. But this one I didn't catch well enough. That's a better view. This one came out clear. So there you go. Remember when I said how it feels sort of like you're up on top of the world and you can just see forever? Well, this certainly lived up to that reputation. Very much gave that impression. It looks like you can just see forever. And in fact, you are seeing a long way. I mean, you're probably seeing a good 20 to 30 miles out here because there's nothing to block the view. I mean, there's no trees or very few trees. They're very short. It's a cloudless day, so you can see there's certainly no pollution or haze up here because you're God knows how far away from any kind of cities. So I mean, you get any kind of elevation and you could just see on a clear day so far away. In any case, you go up here and the imprint that humans have made on the landscape is very minimal. You're still in a fairly pristine environment. I mean, not perfectly so. There's electricity and everything up here, but it's about as close to wilderness as you're likely to see. But anyway, so that's looking down on the town of Red Bay and trying to capture some more of this ice flows in the harbor. Here you go, Red Bay, National Historic Site of Canada. Yes, this is a historic site. I mentioned that people have been living here since the 16th century. That's the 1500s. Go back into teaching mode. That's the 1500s, the 16th century. Labrador flag, Canadian flag, and I believe that this is a Basque flag. Again, I could be wrong on that, but I think that that's what this is. Note the little thumbing their nose at Newfoundland. There's no Newfoundland flag here, just the Labrador flag. Labrador's flag is pretty recent. It was only designed in the 1990s. And there's still some dispute about, Labrador's particular status. It's part of Newfoundland, but some people would like to be... There's some fierce Labrador pride amongst the people who live up here because they're so remote. This is the Red Bay Church. Again, a tiny picturesque church. I really would have liked to have gone inside this, but it was not open. I tried and it was locked. Again, by the time I took this pictures, this was pretty late in the evening. This was after 6 p.m. So if it was open, it had already shut down for the day, and that's understandable. This was one of the very few places to get something to eat and very few places to buy something. The Whalers Restaurant and Gift Shop. This is where I bought the Labrador flag. So If you're wondering where this came from, it was from in there. I thought that I definitely wanted to get something from Labrador on this trip, and I was like, well, I'll just find something up there. Well, there were like 2 or 3 stores, period, on this whole drive up because there's so few people that live in this area. This was one of the very few places to buy any kind of gift or any kind of souvenir. I did not eat here. I didn't want to stay for dinner because if I stayed for dinner, I wouldn't get out of here until like 8, and then I still had like a 2-hour drive to get back down to L'Anse-aux-Clercs where I was staying. So I didn't want to push it and be out too late. Anyway, there are just a few last pictures of the ice floes in the harbor. I like the way this one turned out. You often, I don't know, looking directly into the sun gives you some weird stuff sometimes, but I do think this one turned out reasonably well. And then these are some of the little, some of the docks and some of the little fishing vessels right on the water. And then here's another view, another 2 views of the whatever those ice floes were that were in the harbor, just kind of sitting out there in the middle of the water. I guess it wasn't cold. I guess it wasn't warm enough for them to melt because they were just sitting out there. I wonder how big they were when they initially floated down. That'd be a good question. I wonder. Now, one other thing that I need to mention before we finish up this section is you might have noticed this reddish colored thing in some of these pictures, and that is actually the slowly rusting hulk of a ship. Yes, there was a cargo ship that sank in Red Bay in the 1960s, I believe. And, well, they brought the people up, the salvage experts, to look at salvaging the ship, and they concluded that it was not cost efficient to salvage the ship, that it would cost too much money to break it down for scrap or tow it to another port further south. So they just left it there, and it's been slowly rusting for like the last 50 years in the harbor. Yeah, so there's a ship that sank, and that's been slowly rusting in the harbor for ages. And it's quite a story. You can see it in some of these other pictures too that I took earlier. If I go back a second, see right, that's where it is right there. The ship that's slowly falling apart in the harbor. They just have it like roped off so no one can go close. It's like danger, stay away. And any ships passing through are just told to keep away from whatever this was. But yeah, I mean, there's this ship that's just slowly decaying in the harbor because it's too expensive to salvage it. I don't know, it's just a weird story, but you hear stuff like that when you go to some of these places. Anyway, I thought that was pretty wild as well. And then here's a picture of the road. The road on the Labrador Coastal Drive is paved up to Red Bay. After Red Bay, it is not paved. And in fact, the rest of the Trans-Labrador Highway is not paved. So yes, you can go all the way around and down into Quebec, but it's not paved for the majority of that trip. So the next 1,100 kilometers are not paved. They're all gravel. And this is the start of that heading north. See the sign for Happy Valley Goose Bay? 538K. Up to Happy Valley Goose Bay. And in fact, there's one stretch where you go 400K without a single service station. No gas stations, no places to stop. If you run into trouble, well, you better have a satellite phone because they're not coming to get you. Let's put it that way. Again, I wanted to try this drive, but the Trans-Labrador Highway was closed over by Labrador City. So I could not do this drive. And it may have been a good idea. I don't know if my car would have handled this, but I was willing to try. But it was not to be because the highway was closed, and I could not try to do that drive if I might not be able to get through, basically. So it was not to be. But that's the highway. That's what it looks like heading north. Maybe someday. Maybe someday. They are eventually going to pave this, by the way, but that probably won't happen for the next 10 to 20 years. This is actually a new road. The Trans-Labrador Highway was only finished in 2010. Yeah, so this road has only been completed all the way through for a couple years at this point. They will slowly pave over it, and maybe at that point I'll be able to come back and drive it. Anyway, this is where I stayed, the Northern Light Inn. Again, there aren't many places to stay in Labrador. This was in L'Anse-aux-Clercs, as I mentioned. This was close to the ferry. I wanted to stay close to the ferry because, of course, I had to go back over to Newfoundland the next day, early in the morning. And here's a little story. In the room where I stayed, I was watching I was put on the baseball game, and I was like, oh my god, I'm actually able to watch the Orioles game. I can watch my O's play in Labrador, of all places. This is like the craziest thing I've ever seen. Well, there's a story behind that. It actually wasn't that the Orioles were on TV. It was that the Blue Jays were on TV. The Blue Jays being, of course, Canada's only baseball team. If you note here, Blue Jays at Indians is currently delayed due to weather. So the Blue Jays game was in a rain delay, and so they went to a random other game, and the game they picked was the Orioles versus Rangers game. So I was like, oh my god, I can watch the O's play while I'm in the back country of nowhere in Labrador. So I thought that was worthy of getting a picture here. All the way up in Labrador, and I get to watch the O's plays. But anyway, the rain delay ended, and they went back to the Blue Jays game, and I was very disappointed. So I was like, oh. But anyway, I did get to see them play an inning or so. Okay, but anyway, that's what I see. That's what you have to see here. Oh, and by the way, there is did shoot some movie footage here of Red Bay as well. So I'll just put this up here for you. It was again quite windy. Now, one problem with the Labrador Coast is because the Labrador Coast is basically a tundra environment. In the summer, it has the same problems that all tundra environments do, and that means in the summer, it is a huge breeding ground for mosquitoes and flies, and you might be able to see that if you're looking closely in this video. There are flies everywhere on the coast. Yeah, they have a very brief summer season when they come out and hatch from their eggs or whatever it is, but they come out in droves, and it is not pleasant. Let me just put it that way. So you can't be out of your car too much. I had drenched myself in bug spray, and they were still a real nuisance. So yeah, so keep that in mind. You might want to get a bug net if you plan on being outside for any length of time. I wouldn't say that should stop you from going there, but just be aware of it. So again, where's Red Bay? We'll use Google Maps. This is Red Bay right here, if I remember correctly. Yeah, there we are. So here's Red Bay, and there's that island. Oh, apparently this island is known as Saddle Island. I did not know that. And this road right here, this is where the scenic overlook is. You're up on the hill and you're looking down. And it's an archaeological site. They've actually dug up some very interesting stuff there from people who lived here, fishers and whalers in like the 15 and 1600s who lived here. But I didn't have time to look at a lot of that. But anyway, so there's Red Bay. And again, let's just zoom out, by the way. So where is Red Bay? Let's just keep zooming out if you're really curious on where this is, to show you how far in the middle of nowhere this is. So on our map of North America, that's Labrador, and that's where Red Bay is. So yeah, you are kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Let's just put it that way. And helps to show why, well, when icebergs drift down from Baffin Island in Greenland, they wind up on the coast of Labrador, and that's where they wind up. So that's all I have to say for this one. Not all the pictures I took. We will need to do a fourth and final installment, but this video is a little over the hour mark, and it will be over the 2-hour mark if I try to cram this into one video. So let's split it up into 2 videos, shall we? And we'll finish up by looking at Newfoundland in more detail and looking at the city of St. John's, which is the capital of Newfoundland, in the next part. Anyway, until next time, have a great week. I'll see you guys later. Take care. Have a good one.